The cold got into the building the way it always did in November, not through the doors, not through the windows, but through the floor, up through the soles of her shoes, settling somewhere in her knees before she even made it to her desk. Tess had been the junior accountant at Mercer and Holt Financial for 4 years. She knew every number in that office. The overtime rates, the sick day policies, the exact dollar amount of the Christmas bonus they had quietly stopped giving out 2 years ago. What she had not known, until that particular Tuesday morning, was that her desk would be empty. Not cleaned out, empty, as in someone else's things were on it. There was a fern. She did not own a fern. Oh, her manager, Philip, appeared behind her the way managers always appear. Too close, already talking. Right, so we wanted to tell you before, well, he had not told her before she. The fern belonged to Devon. Devon, who had been hired 8 months ago. Devon, who Tess had personally trained on the reconciliation software, because Devon had kept clicking the wrong column, and Tess felt sorry for her. Devon, who had apparently spent those 8 months doing something Tess had not thought to do, which was sleeping with Philip. The promotion had been announced internally 2 weeks ago. Tess's name had not been on the email. She had assumed it was a clerical error. She had been, as it turned out, the only person in the building who thought that. "There's a severance package," Philip said. 4 years. 2 weeks. She took the box they gave her. It had her stapler in it, her spare lip balm, a sweater she had kept in her drawer since February, because the radiator in her corner ran cold. She walked out of the elevator, through the lobby, past the security guard who said, "Have a good one, Tess," because he was the only person in that building who had ever used her name like it was worth something. Outside, it was 4 and dropping. She had nowhere to go. Her apartment was a 40-minute train ride, and she was not ready to be in it yet. She had not cried, and she was not going to cry, not on Bay Street, not where people walked past in their coats looking purposeful, but she was also not ready to sit on her kitchen floor eating crackers, which was where she knew this evening was headed. So she went somewhere in between, a bar on King Street that she had walked past 100 times. Dark wood, heavy doors, the kind of place that looked expensive without advertising it. She went in because no one she knew would be in there at 2:30 on a Tuesday afternoon. She was right about that. She was wrong about everything else. The bartender did not ask questions. That was the first thing she appreciated. He poured what she ordered, moved to the other end of the bar, left her alone with her box of office items and her bad afternoon. The place was almost empty. 2 men in suits near the window, speaking low. An older woman nursing something amber at the far end. Tess sat in the middle, which felt like the right choice. Not hiding, not exposed, just present. She had 4 years of forensic accounting experience and a very good memory for numbers and no job. Devon had a fern and a promotion and, presumably, a job. Tess ordered a second drink. She was not paying attention to the door when it opened. She was paying attention to the way the ice was melting in her glass, which was the kind of useless detail your brain fixates on when it's trying very hard not to think about the important things. So she did not notice the man who came in, or the 2 men who came in behind him, or the way the bartender's posture changed. That small, involuntary correction, the kind people make when someone powerful walks into a room. She noticed the voice, low, measured, the kind of voice that did not raise itself to fill a room. It just assumed the room would quiet down around it. "That seat's taken." Tess looked up. The man standing next to her was not looking at her. He was looking at the booth across the bar where the 2 suited men had been sitting. They were no longer sitting. They were standing, moving toward the exit at a speed that was just below running. He sat down, not in the booth, at the bar, 1 seat away from her. She looked at him the way you look at someone when you're deciding whether they're a problem. He was tall, which she registered first because she was Sintin and he was not. Dark coat, no tie. A jaw like it had been carved out of something that didn't soften easily. There was a scar above his left eyebrow that had healed badly, or had been left to heal on its own, which she recognized as a choice and not an accident. He looked at her. "Not long. Just enough. You're in my seat," he said. "There are 12 other seats at this bar," Tess said. A pause. The corner of his mouth moved, which might have been something, or might have been nothing. "Fair," he said, and ordered a drink without looking at the bartender. She turned back to her glass. Her box was on the stool beside her. The sweater was visible at the top, the one from the drawer, pale blue and slightly fuzzy at the cuffs from too many washes. It looked exactly like what it was, the sweater of a person who had expected to still have a job today. "Bad day," he said. "Not a question. You don't know that. You're carrying a box with a stapler in it, and it's Tuesday afternoon." She looked at her box. She looked at him. "You have good eyes." "I have good everything," he said, and drank. It was such an absurd thing to say that she almost laughed. "Almost. Is that so? According to several people who are paid to tell me. That's not the same as it being true." He looked at her again. This time it lasted longer. "No," he said. "It's not." She did not know his name then. She learned it later, in the way you learn things about certain men. Not from them, but from the way other people stopped talking when he walked past. The way the bartender, who she later learned had been working that bar for 11 years, refilled his glass without being asked, and then found somewhere else to be. His name was Harlan Voss. She would have known it, had she been the kind of person who followed certain news. Business columns, crime pages, the kind of long-form investigative journalism that people shared and then did not read. But Tess read balance sheets. She read reconciliation reports. She read the fine print on employment contracts that turned out not to matter. She did not read about Harlan Voss. What she did, on that Tuesday afternoon, was talk to him for 2 hours about the most boring thing she could think of, which was forensic accounting. She was not trying to impress him. She was trying to get out of her own head, and explaining double-entry bookkeeping to a man who looked like he had never been bored in his life was exactly strange enough to do it. He listened. That was the other thing. He actually listened. Not the polite performance of listening, where someone nods at the right intervals and waits for their turn. He listened the way people listen when they're actually interested, asking questions that were specific and occasionally inconvenient, like, "How do you find it when someone's deliberately layered it?" and "What's the smallest amount you've ever flagged?" She answered, because the questions were good. At some point, the bar filled up around them, and she did not notice. When she finally looked at her phone, it was past 7. She had 2 missed calls from her mother, which she was not going to think about, and a text from her friend Juno that said, "Did you actually get fired today? Call me," because word traveled fast in their particular circle. "I have to go," she said. "I know." She picked up her box. She put on her coat, which took longer than it should have, because her arms were cold and the sleeves were difficult. He did not offer to help, which she appreciated. She did not need help with her coat. "You know a lot about financial irregularities for an accountant who just lost her job," he said. "I know a lot about financial irregularities for anyone," she said. There was a moment. She did not know how to classify it then. Later, she would describe it as the pause before something, which is not very precise, but is also exactly right. "I might have a use for that," he said. "I'm not looking for work," she said. "You're carrying a box with a stapler in it." "I'm looking," she said, "for better work." She left. The cold hit her on the way out, and she thought about the conversation for approximately the entire 40-minute train ride home, and then she sat on her kitchen floor and ate crackers, because some things are inevitable. He found her 6 days later. She was at the public library on St. George Street, which is where she went when she needed to think, because it was warm, and no one knew her there, and the chairs were better than the ones in her apartment. She was working through a freelance bookkeeping contract she had picked up, the legitimate kind, for a restaurant on Ossington, when a card appeared on the desk beside her laptop. No name, just a number and an address. She looked up. One of the men from the bar, not Harlan, one of the 2 who had been in the booth, stood at a respectful distance with his hands in his coat pockets. He nodded at the card, then left. She stared at the card for a long time. She called Juno that night. Juno was not helpful. "If a mysterious man's associate leaves you a card at the library," Juno said, "you throw it away and you do not go. What if the address is interesting? Tess, I have excellent instincts for people who are lying about money, Tess said. And he wasn't lying about anything, that you could tell, Juno said. This was technically correct. She went anyway. She went because she had 4 years of forensic accounting experience and 2 weeks of severance, and Devon had her desk, and her stapler was sitting on her kitchen counter. And she was tired of being the most competent person in every room who also somehow had the least to show for it. The address was a building in the financial district, which surprised her. She had expected something more dramatic. A warehouse, a parking garage, not a glass tower with a lobby that had expensive plants and a security desk that expected her. They knew her name. That was the first sign that this was not going to be a normal job interview. The office itself was on the 42nd floor. It had a view of the lake that would have cost someone an extraordinary amount of money. The furniture was dark and the room was very quiet, and Harlan Voss was standing at the window when she came in, which she suspected was intentional. "You came," he said. "I almost didn't," she said. "But you did." "But I did." She sat down without being invited to, because she had decided before she walked in that she was not going to be the kind of person who waited to be told where to sit. So, he turned from the window. In the office, in the daylight, he looked different than he had in the bar, more deliberate, like each part of him had been arranged carefully and then maintained. The scar above his eyebrow was more visible. There were others she hadn't seen before, one at his throat, faint, old. "I need someone who can look at books that have been engineered to not be looked at," he said. "Find what's missing. Find where it went. Forensic accounting for what kind of operation." He looked at her for a moment. "The kind that doesn't use that word. I'm going to need more than that, I know." What followed was, improbably, the most honest conversation Tess had ever had in a professional setting. He did not lie to her. He did not euphemize. He explained what he ran, the scope of it, the problem he had. Someone inside his organization was routing money out through a shell structure so carefully built that his own people had missed it for 8 months. He told her the number. It was a number that made her set down her pen. "You're telling me this," she said. "Yes, you don't know me. I know enough," he said. "What if I go to the police?" "Then you go," he said. "But you won't. You're very certain." "You went to the library to think it over," he said. "You called someone who told you not to come. You came anyway. You're not here because you're reckless. You're here because you're angry and you're good at what you do and no one has let you do it properly." She looked at him. "That's a very specific reading." "I told you," he said. "Good everything." This time she did laugh. It came out before she could stop it, which she hadn't expected. He looked at her like the laugh surprised him too, like he hadn't entirely expected to cause it. She took the contract. It was a real contract, pages long, with clauses and penalties, and a rate that was more than she had made in any single year at Mercer and Holt. She took it home, and she read every word of it, which took most of the night, and she found one clause she wanted changed, and she emailed the change to the number on the card, and at 11:30 at night received back a revised document with the change accepted and no comment. She signed it at midnight. The money had been going out through 3 companies. It took her 11 days. She worked in an office 2 floors below his, which had everything she needed and a window that faced north and a coffee situation that was significantly better than anything at Mercer and Holt. No one bothered her. No one stopped by to ask how things were going, or to have her train someone who would then take her position, or to mention that the Christmas bonus situation was under review. She worked. On the 11th day, she knocked on the door of the 42nd floor and put a folder on his desk. 3 companies, 6 accounts, 8 months, and a name. He opened the folder. He read it the way she had learned he read things, completely, without expression, without asking questions until he had finished. When he looked up, his face was the same as it always was, contained, deliberate. "You're certain," he said. "I'm always certain," she said. "That's what you hired me for." There was a long pause. She stood there. She was not fidgeting. She had stopped fidgeting somewhere around day 3, when she realized that showing uncertainty in this office was like bleeding in a specific kind of water. "The name," he said. "You know what that means. I know what it means. And you're still standing here. I found it, she said. What you do with it is your business. That's what the contract says. He looked at her. Something shifted in him, which she was learning to recognize, the almost imperceptible change when something registered that he hadn't expected. It wasn't softness. It was closer to recalculation. Most people, he said, would want to know. I'm not most people, she said. And I find that the less I know about certain consequences, the better I sleep. That's practical. I'm a practical person. He closed the folder. There's another one, he said. Different structure. Going back further. She should have said no. She had said no, in a sense, to every other version of this, to overtime that wasn't compensated, to credit that went somewhere else, to work that exceeded her job description in ways that nobody bothered to acknowledge. She was very good at saying no. Rates the same? She said. Higher, he said. She thought about Devon's fern. Same clause structure. Whatever clause you want, he said. She ran into him outside the building 3 weeks later. Not planned. She was leaving late, later than she'd meant to, and it was February now, and the cold was the serious kind, the kind that had intent. He was on the steps with one of his people, looking at his phone, and she almost walked past him but didn't, because she had started to notice that walking past Harlan Voss was something she had to make a conscious choice to do. Still here, he said. The second set goes back 5 years, she said. It takes time. I wasn't criticizing. She pulled her coat tighter. I know. They stood there on the steps for a moment, which was long enough to be something without being long enough to name. The city moved around them, taxis and cold breath and someone's music from a passing car. There's a restaurant, he said. Thursday, what kind of restaurant? The kind I own, he said. I thought you'd want to see the books. She looked at him. Is that what that is? That's what it is if you want it to be, he said. She decided later that this was the most honest anyone had ever asked her anywhere. No performance of it, no elaborate construction, no version of what she was supposed to want. Just the offer, plainly, and the choice handed to her. Thursday, she said. Thursday, he said. She told Juno about Thursday. Juno was not reassured. You already took the contract, Juno said, and then you took the second contract, and now you're going to look at restaurant books, Tess said. Tess. He's never lied to me, she said. Not once. I can tell. You can tell. I work in financial forensics, Tess said. I find things people have hidden. I'm very good at knowing when something doesn't add up. Juno was quiet for a moment, and he adds up. Tess thought about the contract clauses, the 11 days, the folder on the desk and the way he had read it without flinching and without pretending. The way he'd said whatever clause you want, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. He's the most honest person I've worked for, she said, which is either the saddest thing I've ever said or a very good sign. It's both, Juno said. I know, Tess said. I'm going anyway. The restaurant was on a Thursday in February, and it went well, and she did look at the books, because they were genuinely interesting. A hospitality structure with 3 subsidiaries, and a catering arm that had a minor depreciation issue. She flagged on a napkin, and he photographed with his phone and forwarded to someone before the entrees arrived, which she found, unexpectedly, attractive. There was a second Thursday, then a third. She was not a person who had been treated carefully. She had been treated as useful, which is a different thing entirely. At Mercer and Holt she had been the person you gave the complicated reconciliations to, the one that required actual attention, and then someone else got the credit, and someone else got the desk, and she had her stapler in a box on a Tuesday afternoon. She knew what it felt like to be the resource in the room who was not in the room when decisions were made. With Harlan it was different. She was in the room. She was asked. Her answers were used immediately in ways she could see. When she found something, it mattered. When she raised a concern, it was addressed. It was such a straightforward experience of being competent and having that be enough that it took her a while to trust it. She trusted it slowly, the way you trust something that has never broken. Not because you've decided to trust it, but because it just keeps holding. She found out who he was to the city, what he was, not from him, but from a magazine left in the office waiting room. Investigative piece, 6 months old, the kind with a black and white photo and a headline that people shared and did not read. She read it. She read the whole thing, standing in the waiting room in her coat, and then she took the elevator up to the 42nd floor and stood in the doorway of his office. He was on the phone. He looked at her. He finished the call. "You knew I'd find out," she said. "Yes," he said. "You didn't tell me." "You didn't ask," he said. "And you're good enough at your job that it would have been in the contracts anyway, if you'd looked." She thought about the contracts. She thought about the clause she had changed, and the way it had come back revised at 11:30 at night. She thought about whatever clause you want. "Is anything you've told me not true?" she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. "Is there anything you haven't told me that I would want to know?" Another pause longer. "Yes," he said. She appreciated that more than she would have appreciated the easier answer. "Are you going to tell me? If you ask," he said. She asked. He told her. It took a long time and a significant amount of information. And by the time he was done, it was dark outside, and the city lights had come on over the lake, and she was sitting in the chair across from his desk, where she had sat that first day, and she had not interrupted him once. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You should have told me before the first contract," she said. "Yes," he said. "Why didn't you?" "Because you would have left," he said, "and I needed you to stay." "You needed my work," she said. He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "and I needed you to stay." The distinction was small and was everything. She did not leave. This was not because she failed to consider it. She considered it with the same rigor she brought to everything. She laid out what she knew. She assessed the gaps. She looked at the numbers both literal and not. What she found, when she looked honestly, was that she had not felt like herself anywhere as much as she felt like herself in that building, with that work, in the presence of a man who thought her being difficult about contract clauses was apparently something he admired. She had been told her whole professional life, in the way that workplaces tell you things without saying them, that the qualities she had were inconvenient, that she was too precise, too particular, too unwilling to round the numbers to something easier. She had spent 4 years being the person who found the problems and watching other people be rewarded for the finding. With Harlan, precision was the point. Being particular was the point. Refusing to round down was not only acceptable, it was what she was paid for, paid well for, paid more than she had ever been paid for anything. She stayed for that, partly. She stayed for other reasons too. Reasons she listed to herself in the way that she listed everything. Carefully, without sentimentality, with specific attention to whether the numbers held. They held. In March she moved her stapler to the office on the 40th floor, because she had started bringing things in without meaning to. Better pens, a specific type of tea, a small plant that was not a fern, and at some point it was easier to acknowledge that she was not going anywhere than to keep pretending she was still deciding. Harlan said nothing about the stapler. He said nothing about the tea, or the pens, or the plant. On a Wednesday in late March, he came down to her floor at the end of the day and said, without preamble, "The Brennan situation has been resolved." She knew what Brennan was. She had found Brennan. How resolved? "Resolved," he said. "I'm not going to ask," she said. "I know," he said. She saved her work. She turned off her monitor. "Thursday," he said. She picked up her coat and her bag and walked to the elevator. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, she was not thinking about what came next, or whether this would hold, or who would eventually notice that she was better at this than anyone was giving her credit for. She already knew who noticed. He noticed everything. It was, after all, what made him good at what he did, and she had stopped being afraid of being seen by someone who saw clearly.